Just shy of the 6 months that the U.S. Israeli genocidal war on the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, the Israeli regime has shown its true colors yet again by targeting a U.S.-based aid truck. Does this incident show, regardless of the origin of aid, Israel targets them to prevent aid from getting to Palestinians? In this edition of the Spotlight, we will look at other targets, from the press to hospitals. Also, a look at the developments in the occupied West Bank, where deaths and the number of Palestinian detainments in particular continue to rise. First, let me introduce our guests. Patrick Henningsen, a geopolitical analyst, joins us from Los Angeles. Also joining us, Charlotte Cates, International Coordinator at the Samidoun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network from Vancouver. Welcome to you both. Patrick Henningsen, let me first start with you. And this incident with the U.S.-based aid truck where 7 Gaza aid workers, it included UK, US, and Australian citizens. We saw a lot of reaction from this, overwhelmingly, around the world. But in particular, one that stood out was the way that the U.S. president came out and compassionately said that this was just such an unfortunate mistake, which it was. But when you put that into context of over 32,000 Palestinians who have been murdered all this time, he did not show that kind of compassion for the genocide that's taken place. First, give us your reaction on the incident itself and the way that the U.S. president reacted to it.
Yes. Well, the incident itself, it's debatable whether it was an accident or not. I think it's too early to make that determination. It's very specific targeting and a very specific operation that wasn't just striking one vehicle, but 3 in total, as the occupants of the vehicle fled to escape in another vehicle that was hit. When they fled a second time, that was hit. So to say this was an accident is still up for debate, I think. That's very important. Second of all, what does this mean? Look at the overall ramifications of it. What's the end result? The end result is less aid getting into Gaza. So we still have to sort of sift through the incident and the after effects of this to find out what it really means going forward. I really have a hard time believing the Israelis did this by accident. I think this more likely was intentional, but intentional with a certain set of objectives to come out the other side. Also, it could have been a case where there could have been somebody on board that suddenly became a target for the IDF. These are all things open for discussion at the present time. As far as the reaction to it and just general Western selective outrage, it's selective outrage. They can't find it within their hearts, within their moral or ethical center to condemn what's clearly a brutal genocide which has been carried out for the last 6 months against the native Palestinian population in Gaza. But yet it's time for a moment of silence because of Western aid workers were killed. There's been a number of UN employees that dozens, in fact, killed since the beginning of this phase of the conflict. Not a tear was shed, not a word was raised in concern from any U.S. officials or European officials that I could see after all these UN workers were killed in the opening weeks of Israel's rapacious bombing campaign on Gaza.
Yes, the data that we have is 196, including more than 175 UN staff. So, Charlotte Cates, what do you think? Is this a concerted effort by Israel, given the fact that even the coordinates were given out on this, and yet, despite the coordinating movements related to the Israeli, army, the combat was hit anyways. Is there a concerted effort by Israel to stop aid from getting to Palestinians? It doesn't even matter if this was U.S.-based or any aid type of assistance. Is that what their goal is?
Yes, of course. I mean, the Zionist regime is carrying out a genocide in Palestine, particularly in Gaza right now. And part and parcel of that is denying basic services and needs to the Palestinian people in Gaza. This includes the brutal attacks on health facilities, such as the massacre that we just witnessed at Al-Shifa just days ago. This includes the ongoing targeting of bakeries that we have seen throughout the past 6 months. This includes, historically in Gaza, we have consistently seen the Zionist forces targeting farming areas along the so-called borders of Gaza, the colonially imposed borders, and fishers out at sea in order to prevent Gaza from developing food security and food sovereignty. So this is just a continuation and an exacerbation of the existing policy of the Zionist regime in targeting the food needs and food resources of the Palestinian people in Gaza. This is part of the same policy that we've seen time and time again. What we initially saw from the Zionist regime was this demand to dissolve UNRWA and instead replace it with private institutions with relationships with Western intelligence agencies. But fundamentally, the purpose of that demand is to deny Palestinians access to basic fundamental needs in an attempt to drive Palestinians from the land and complete a genocide. The Zionist regime is using starvation as a weapon of war. There's no question about that. They want to carry out a genocide. They want to impose conditions of surrender on the Palestinian people, and the people in their resistance are refusing this completely. And so they're determined. This is very much like when we think about the siege of Leningrad or the Battle of Stalingrad, when people were fighting back against the Nazi forces. That's what the Palestinian people and their resistance are doing right now. And they're facing the same kind of siege that's determined to attack human life in all of its capacity. So that's the reality of what the situation is. And that's why, yeah, of course, they're going to attack aid workers. And when aid agencies responded to those attacks by saying, oh, well, we're going to stop providing aid in Gaza, that's doing nothing but aiding the Zionists in carrying out their genocide and war crimes.
Trying to understand here what the U.S. has gotten himself into, Patrick Henningsen, on the one hand, unless the U.S. is aware of what's happening. Because when you take a look at what is happening, it's nothing short of a genocide, along with all the other gruesome facets of this war that's happening, and all the different, for example, our guest there talked about this massacre that it pretty much unfolded. We weren't even aware. Up to 400 dead bodies. Some were tied behind their backs, some were executed, many of them women and children, and the bodies are decapitated. That had happened from a short while ago. And there are many instances of that. We're coming up on the 6 months of this genocidal war. Does the U.S. realize what's happening when it comes to the Israeli regime? And does it approve it and give it a green light? The green light we see given is through the arms sales.
Yeah, I think being in the United States, I can tell you that the basic level of political awareness of the average media consumer, member of the American electorate, it's extremely low because the media coverage is completely one-sided. Censorship by omission is the basic order of the day when it comes to any coverage relating to Israel or Gaza. There's been a few breaches in this information firewall, but on the whole, how the political establishment operates in America is they will not veer from any policy if there's not any significant public pushback. So how do you control public pushback? You control the images that are shown in the media. Any emotive images that might elicit a public reaction, those are basically muted and rarely shown. So the average American doesn't know the true scale of the horror of the situation there. So that's the main problem. And the United States government is completely on board with, I would say, everything that Israel has done from the beginning and continues to do. To think that the United States and its military would be constructing a jetty or a pier almost along the sort of the green line of North and South Gaza, and that somehow this doesn't have any military or strategic aspect to it is totally naive. Okay, what they're trying to do is effectively cut off the north and the south of Gaza in order to finish emptying out the north and make it a military security zone. And so this is a pier to bring in U.S. ships and transport ships to evacuate the poor Gazans. And this is how the United States plans to turn the public relations war back in its favor, to use its military, to use its NGOs, USAID, etc., to rescue and bring aid to the poor people of Gaza, when all along the United States has been the main enabler of the bombing campaign of this absolutely unprecedented, violent and destructive, and you can only call it a mass killing on an industrial scale by the Israelis and the United States military. The Israeli couldn't carry this out for another minute if not for the bombs, the ammunition, the targeting assistance, the satellite reconnaissance, the drone technology, the U.S. personnel, the Patriot missile batteries that form the Iron Dome, etc. Wouldn't happen without the United States. So, and that's what this whole charade that you're seeing with the World Kitchen NGO and this facade of airdropping aid into Gaza by the United States. This is just public relations to turn the tide on what's been an unmitigated disaster for the Biden administration and the Democratic Party in an election year. I know that sounds crass and craven, but that's exactly, I believe, what we're looking at.
All right, about 700,000, more or less, is what we're looking at, Charlotte Case, when it comes to northern Gaza in terms of the Palestinians who are grappling with starvation. Some are fighting for their lives. We're looking at an increased number who have died as a result. This is really a horror that's unfolding, and soon it's going to spike because there's no aid, there's no food. What do you make of the fact that if you do a simple Google search, it was just 3 weeks ago that there's any news on this so-called U.S. Gaza port that's supposed to bring in food, except for the two, I guess, runs that maybe the EU made and some of these airdrops that are killing Palestinians also. It just puts into question the sincerity of the U.S. when it comes to the food aspect and aid for Palestinians.
Well, I don't think the sincerity of the U.S. is in question. The fact is that the U.S. is very clearly entirely insincere when it comes to the needs of the Palestinian people, and is very sincere when it comes to sending billions of dollars more weapons to the Zionist regime to carry out the genocide of the Palestinian people. There's no question about what the U.S. takes seriously and what it's lying about, kind of in a very bold-faced lie, and attempting to kind of sanction and target anyone who does otherwise. I mean, just yesterday at the United Nations, at the emergency hearing of the Security Council convened against the Zionist regime's horrific, illegal attack on the Iranian embassy in Damascus, the U.S. representative spent his time talking, quote unquote, warning Iran and talking about the so-called Syrian regime when it was Iran and Syria that were the victims of a blatant aggression and violation of all forms of international norms and principles. So it's very clear what the U.S. is serious about and what it's blatantly lying about. And one of the things it's blatantly lying about is any interest in providing aid and support to the Palestinian people. The so-called port off of Gaza is nothing more than an excuse to introduce an even greater and more overt military U.S. presence directly in the region. And furthermore, the U.S. Is the entity that is making sure that the Rafah crossing remains closed. If the United States wanted to ask Egypt to open the Rafah crossing, it is capable of doing so at any minute. It is just as much as it is capable of putting pressure on the Zionist regime and cutting off the flow of weapons. It's also equally capable of putting pressure on the Egyptian regime to open the Rafah crossing and allow the thousands and thousands and thousands of trucks that are stacked up there passage through. What are the I mean, it's very obvious what the U.S. would do if it were interested in the humanitarian needs of the Palestinian people. The U.S. is interested in maintaining imperialist domination and hegemony in the region, and it's going along and arming and aiding Israel's genocide in order to do so.
Some countries are shying away now, not shying away, they're putting a ban on their export of arms there. Patrick, in terms of that, we can look at Canada, halting arms sales to Israel. Denmark and Italy have already suspended their arms exports. And according to the Netherlands, has ruled the government to do the same. Although some of these licenses are from before where they're still getting exported to Israel, but from January on. Do you think that we're looking at countries realizing, and the UK is mulling this over, realizing that we need to stop associating with Israel in a military aspect, because clearly the number of deaths are pointing to the fact that genocide indeed is taking place?
Yeah, I don't know. I have a hard time accepting that any of these countries are seriously considering some kind of an arms embargo or sanctions against Israel. Look at how quickly the world jumped on top of the Russian Federation in the opening days and weeks of their special military operation in the Donbass in the Ukraine. It was a global full sanctions package, the likes of which the world had never seen before. And if you look at the civilian casualties in that conflict over 2 years, this is even backed up by UN data. It's the lowest in terms of a conflict of that scale, conventional conflict, the lowest amount of civilian casualties. More casualties, in fact, on the Russian, eastern Ukrainian Russian side. What point I'm making is Israel has shattered all records in terms of the speed and the rapaciousness of the killing since October 7th. And there's not been one call for sanctions against Israel. The most obvious sanctions would be an arms embargo. So the United States is really the main country, I think, that matters in that equation. But there are other NATO member states like France. Germany is also a big supplier of equipment and support for the Israeli government, for the IDF, and so is Britain. And so that would be the most obvious place. The only reason you're hearing noises about it now is because they're starting to get some serious pushback from important sections of the electorate, and governments are losing confidence from the people and also credibility, because they are backing what is ostensibly now, and I think everyone can agree, it is a genocide that's taking place in real time. So if these governments want to maintain any credibility at the G20, at any of these global confabs, at the United Nations, UN Security Council, they're going to have to start making some serious moves. But I honestly don't think they're serious about it, because then the talking point comes from the Israeli lobby, which is that you can't leave us in the lurch. You can't leave us exposed here. We've got Hamas and the Iranians and Hezbollah. They want to push Israel into the ocean. So that's the talking point. You must arm us, because otherwise we'll be overrun by the Arabs. I know this sounds like ridiculous, but this is the general narrative, and this is what flies in Washington. That is the acceptable storyline in Washington, and that justifies the full-throated support for Israel on every single conceivable level militarily.
Yeah, but the buyers have to be also in tune with the facts. Charlotte Cates, you're looking at the fact that, let's put aside the one that stands out, over 32,000 Palestinians killed. Looking at, for example, the Gaza Strip, 70 to 80% of that strip is basically destroyed, turned into rubble. You're looking at the medical facilities that have been destroyed. You're looking at the massacres in different instances. And you're also looking at the press, where you have, I think, close to 200 reporters and press people that have been also killed. I mean, everything is to the max almost when you take a look at the proportion of it. What else then can there be a deduction on, other than that Israel, in almost all aspects, is after a genocide, and it's eliminating basically anything that stands in the Palestinian way?
I mean, this is absolutely the case. The Zionist regime is carrying out a genocide. The Zionist project has always been a genocidal, colonial, illegitimate project since its inception. It has never been anything else. And it is a project that is fully aligned with imperialist powers, the leading imperialist powers, in this case, the United States, as well as to a lesser extent because of the balance of power that exists in the world, Britain, France, Germany, Canada, the European Union, etc. The Zionist regime is carrying out a genocide. It is failing to accomplish its stated military goals. It has not destroyed the Palestinian resistance. It has failed to, quote unquote, dismantle Hamas. And it will continue to fail to do so. It's failed to destroy the Palestinian resistance for the past 75 years, and it's going to continue to fail to do so. But what it is obviously quite willing to do, and in fact dedicated to doing, is throwing massive weapons of destruction against the Palestinian people, the civilian population, schools, hospitals, places of worship, residential buildings. That is what is being targeted very explicitly and very officially by the Zionist regime. And any attempt to claim otherwise is a blatant lie and a misdirection. All you have to do is look at what the Zionist leadership are saying themselves, not to mention the kind of TikToks and social media content that are being posted by their soldiers. This is content that's being posted by active duty soldiers. If the military didn't want them posting this kind of content, clearly they wouldn't be enabled or allowed to do so. The fact that they are allowed to do so and enabled to do so means that that content is part and parcel of the Zionist propaganda war against the Palestinian people. It's deliberately being created to show off how horrific their genocide is and how proud they are of their war crimes.
The way that the Gaza Strip is experiencing this genocide is almost mirroring what's happening, or on the occupied West Bank is mirroring what's happening there in a sense, where it's not in fifth gear yet. If you agree with that, Patrick, I mean, we're looking at, for example, today there were some mass arrests, 30 were detained, but the arrests have really dramatically increased. On record, I believe it's around 7,000. Some indicate 10,000 have been arrested since October 7th. The number of deaths has also spiked since October 7th. What are we looking at when it comes to that aspect of occupied Palestine?
Sure. I mean, we've spoken to journalists getting 5 a.m. Raids in the morning after posting things on Facebook that the Israelis did not like. So you're not allowed to talk to Western journalists. They're not allowed to have any freedom of speech or expression. Everyone's kind of cowering in fear. So clearly, Israel's stepped up aggression and control measures in the West Bank, and that itself is going to be the next powder keg. If you look at what some of the main reasons for Operation Al-Aqsa Flood are, if you actually pay attention, if the U.S. or anybody did bother to pay attention, it's the huge amount of people stuck and incarcerated extrajudicially in Israeli gulag prisons. And so they're just adding to those numbers in the West Bank because maybe it's a soft touch for them at the moment, so they can feel they can get rid of and disappear and sort of incarcerate any potential resistance activists right now. And that's only going to fuel, I think, the anger and the sort of hitting out that you see from Palestinians that we saw on October 7th. So they're not addressing that problem at all. And instead, they're gaslighting the public about the remaining Israeli prisoners in Gaza, and not talking about the many thousands, including women and children, that are being incarcerated right across this completely illegal and barbaric Israeli prison system. But that's a conversation you're not allowed to have in the United States. You're not allowed to have that conversation in Britain. It's a completely one-sided conversation where it's all about what Hamas is doing, and Israel's not doing anything wrong, and they haven't systemically incarcerated and killed, destroyed, abused, raped how many tens of thousands of people in these prisons over the years.
Thank you very much for that. We're just fresh out of time. Patrick Henningsen, geopolitical analyst from Los Angeles. Thank you. Charlotte Cates, thank you so much. International coordinator, Sami Doon, Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network from Vancouver. With that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight. From me, Kaveh Taghvai, and the team, it's goodbye.